1 second. Let me just start recording and then we can, yep, we're ready to go whenever you are. Go right ahead.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming back. I really appreciate everybody's time. We're going to jump in about systematic screening and we're going to continue the conversation about what we need to know to get started. And before we do, I was hoping you would open up your chat, and will you put into the chat whether or not you are attached to either a district or a school that is already systematic screening for behavior. So it's similar to academics 3 times a year, but are you doing something right now like the BAS 3 BEST or the SABRS or the SRSS-IE? And if you are screening or you're not screening, if you could just put yes or no in the chat and hit enter. I'd just like to see where people are starting today, so I kind of have an idea of where you are in terms of your learning. And if you are enjoying lunch, by all means, feel free to still turn on your video. Would love to just get to see you if at all possible. And I appreciate that people are putting in the chat. It looks like right now a lot of people are exploring screening, and some people have started and some people have not yet. And then Lisa, could you put in what district you're in where you're doing the SRSS-IE? That'd be terrific. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, that's fine too. This is all very helpful. So I'm going to start today by just kind of doing a little bit of situating about systematic screening. And I want to start by giving a nod to somebody that I really respect. His name is Hill Walker, and he's a professor at the University of Oregon. And he introduced the idea of systematic screening and tiered systems. He actually brought the whole idea of tiered systems into the United States from the mental health industry. And so he was one of the very first people that paved the path for many of us that are working in tiered systems like the ones that you're installing for positive behavior intervention and support, and those of you doing CI3T or MTSS or ISF, integrated systems frameworks. But the idea that not every student is going to be benefiting from only tier 1. So the idea that we have this graduated continuum of supports. And we really want to make sure that at each level of prevention, at tier 1, at tier 2, and tier 3, it's all evidence-based. But one of the things that I think he did that was a gift to pave the path for the really fine work that, George Sagai and Rob Horner have done, and others, that is continuing to be led by the National Center right now, which is in I think it's fifth cycle of funding. So it's an incredible resource. But one of the important things that he did also was introduce the idea of systematic screening. And it was taking that idea that we want to actually look 3 times a year to see, are there kids that have behavior challenges that are not yet being met by tier 1? In other words, are there kids for whom tier 1 is not sufficient yet? And I want to be very clear, non-responsiveness is not a tragedy. It's an expectation. We're going to have some kids, just like in the area of reading, that might need a little bit more support to crack the code, or that might need a little extra help to master like subtracting across 0. It's the same healthy approach to behavior. I might have some kids with enough internalizing issues or enough externalizing issues that they need a little bit more. And we just need to make sure that we're supporting the adults in our building and knowing how to find those kids at the very first sign of concern so that we can help them before those behavior patterns become more consistent and less amenable to intervention. So it looks like those of you that are dipping a toe into systematic screening, some of you are starting with the student risk screening scale for internalizing and externalizing, and that's a great place to begin. And again, there's a bunch of resources on the website, so I encourage you to check those out. When I think about the work that Hill Walker's done, I just feel like it's such a gift, to think about that big idea of, wouldn't it be great if we could find kids at the first sign of concern? And I think that is one of the best gifts that we can give in our educational system, because as a parent, when you drop your child off at school, there's, you don't see them for 7.5 hours a day. And our teachers get the opportunity to see our kids stress. They get to see them stretched academically and socially. They're privy to information that nobody else is. So teachers have the gift of being able to see this wide range of behaviors, and they're incredibly accurate at detecting internalizing and externalizing issues. And I remember in the early days of screening, like in the early 90s, a lot of times teachers were like, oh, who am I to fill this out? How would I know? Remember, you're asking them to give you information on very specific behaviors. And you're not saying like, oh, Kathleen got a 3 on stealing, she needs a stealing intervention. not how these tools work. You're looking to see, do those specific behaviors occur together and to a high enough degree? Because if they co-occur to a high enough degree, that's what's putting a child at risk for a challenging behavior. You are not saying a child is a stealer or a liar or a behavior problem. You're just looking for soft signs. And then we want to use that information to shape instruction for child. It should never be used to exclude. So it's not like, you know, Lisa, you've been screened in, and honey, you're not going on that field trip. That's not what we're doing. We're using it to say like, wow, I got a lot of kids in my class with internalizing issues, maybe more than 20%. And if I knew that going in, then I might do something like, rather than try to have a discussion, I might say, I'd like everybody to whip out a little sheet of paper and jot down a couple ideas on this topic. And then I'd like you, if you would, to share with one person next to you. So I would like graduate, kind of like we were talking about in the very first session of like, I'm going to take them where they are and I'm going to scaffold them to get them to feel comfortable until I hope that over time, then they're going to have this. And kids, like if we're going to do this on Zoom, they're going to be able to hide. They're going to be able to not turn their camera on. And I'm not saying we should force every child to do that, but it might be when you might set an expectation that when we're on one-on-one time together, I'm going to want to see your face. I'm going to want to see your eyes so that I can see how you're doing. But we want to make sure we're very contextually and very culturally considerate, because not every home is going to be the exact same home. Some kids may feel embarrassed by what you're going to see in Zoom, and we just want to meet them where they are. So as we're thinking about screening, I think about it like this. The gift of screening is being able to look for soft signs of both major challenges of childhood. And that's externalizing and internalizing. And some kids have that co-occurrence. The early correlation coefficients there were 0.52, which means 25% shared variance, which in just simple terms means those sometimes co-occur together. And the thing that's going to be most likely to capture our attention is the acting out behavior. But underneath that anger, underneath that non-compliance might be, and nobody likes me, and I don't have any friends. So just remember that that is sometimes there. So when we think about the fine work that you're doing, that the benefit of doing this in a system is that you have a plan for responding. And years ago, I had the luxury of working with several school districts in Pennsylvania, and I got an opportunity to work and do some support with Patton. Wendy Oakes and I had the opportunity to go and do several trainings, and I know I've gotten to meet several of you there. And I think one of the nice things about, you know, Pennsylvania and the work that's been done is that in addition to the system, there's also been a priority based on screening. And it's one set of information, just like when you go to the doctor's office to take blood pressure, it doesn't tell you exactly what's wrong. It says that there might be a concern. And so when we're thinking about working in a tiered system, we want accurate detection as to who needs more. And I want to be 100% honest. We're going to make some mistakes sometimes. Sometimes some kids will screen in who probably don't need any extra support. And there'll be some kids that screen out, meaning they said you don't think there's anything wrong, but there is. The major concern is avoiding false negatives. Because if you think about what is the consequence of a false positive, it means the kid gets a little extra help. They might get a higher rated behavior specific praise. They might get check in, checked out. I'm not worried about that. What terrifies me is missing a kid who I could have helped. And seriously, like that, just that's where I lose sleep at night. And so I applaud people for moving forward with screening, and we want to have a plan to screen. But remember, these kids are already there right now. We can't wait a long time on this. So we just need to get clarity on what are you doing at tier 1, and that is your first line of defense. What are we going to do in terms of teacher delivered support once we get the screening information? And then how are we going to connect kids to tier 2 and tier 3? And the gift of screening, of connecting kids to these tiered systems, is we reduce the likelihood of overlooking a child in need. Because if we are only relying on office discipline referrals, I promise you, we will miss these kids. There is no other way to find kids right now with internalizing issues. So when we think about systematic screening, we want to look for tools that are both psychometrically sound, meaning that they accurately work, and that they are socially valid, meaning they're feasible to do. Because as a teacher, and I know you know this, we can't squeeze any more out of ourselves. We're doing the absolute best that we can. So we must give dedicated time. And my suggestion to you is you schedule these right now, like for fall, winter, and spring. during regularly scheduled faculty meetings. So if you're a district that's exploring it or a school that's exploring it, do not put this as one more thing in somebody's mailbox, virtually or otherwise, to do. We need to educate on screening, support that, and get the information back to them as quickly as possible. And one thing that I want to say is there are a lot of wonderful tools out there, and I'm going to share with you some. It doesn't mean I think these are the best, but my goal is to make sure that you pick something that you can sustain for the long haul. These are not interchangeable. So like if I see that some of you are doing the SRSS IE, and that's great. If you were to switch and do like the BAS 3 BES, those scores don't line up. So you got to pick with something that you can sustain. So think about teacher time, think about psychometrics, think about whether or not you've got the resources to afford something that's commercially available and stick with it. So as far as screening tools, on the website, there is this one page that you can just download that has a summary of the main screening tools that are available. And these are behavior screening, remember, and we're talking about teacher completed. So there's no time with kids. These are not student completed, and they are not parent completed. And those are wonderful other sources of information. But as we talked about this morning, you just want to make sure that as you're getting that new information, we want to have a plan for responding it. If you are trying to find this yourself, I'm going to show you where to go to grab it. And there's, remember, a couple of different tabs on that website that can help guide you. But if you go to the main page, I'm going to show you where to go. Go to ci3t.org. Please go to this tab that says Building Your CI3T Model. When you scroll down here, the easiest thing will likely be to click on this, which is absolutely every resource. It's like, here's the templates if you wanted to build your CI3T model. This is what you would need as a coach. Here's exemplars, etc. What I'm talking about right now is R10. That stands for Resource 10. Will you give me a thumbs up if you see my page on your screen? Okay, great. If you click on this, this is a downloadable Word document. And if you are a district decision maker, some of the districts that we've worked with, and I think this is genius, and this is their idea, not mine, they actually take this, and when they walk through the decision-making process, they'll shortlist this, and they'll literally remove the rows for the things that they're not considering because of whatever reason. Either they don't feel like it's representative of their population, or they feel like it's too costly, and then they shortlist this, and that's the information that they share out with faculty and staff and counselors and social workers and parents to get input on. But just know that you don't have to hang on to all the details. And I want to give you a heads up, there's a lot of S's in what we're going to talk about. So just know that that's there. And sometimes people will say to me, Kathleen, just cut through all this and just tell me what's the right one to choose. And it's not that simple of an answer because it depends on like your demographic, like the students that you're trying to serve. You want to actually do your homework to see like what is the reliability and validity behind that. And I am, again, really thankful to our funder, the Institute of Education Sciences. We actually have a $1.5 million grant that's all focused right now on just looking at that one tool, the student risk screening scale for internalizing and externalizing. And we are working with districts right now. They're reaching out and we're doing a negotiated agreements, but we'll be working with districts right now to do additional testing to talk about how these tools are functioning in the COVID era. So it's for schools that are already doing screening, but to say when we do this in a virtual environment, are these tools still working to predict kids? So if you're interested in that, just reach back to me. I'll tell you more about that project. But one of the big things that we want to do is know how what we're doing is influencing risk in a building. That guy that I showed you, Hill Walker, this was the screening tool that he first introduced. I view this to be like the gold standard of systematic screening. It's called the systematic screening for behavior disorders. It allows you to measure both major disorders of childhood, as I mentioned, and they're started off being a preschool version and an elementary version, and now it's been combined into one version. It goes preschool through high school, goes through 9th grade. And so the way it works, and I'm just going to give you this Reader's Digest version, but please read the whole thing to learn more about it if you're considering it. But basically, teachers take their class roster. So imagine I'm an elementary educator, or maybe I'm a middle school educator, and I might be asked to screen students in first period. So every student, doesn't matter who they are, first period, that's who's going to be doing the ratings. So then I show up to a regularly scheduled faculty meeting. There's an online version, and then there's a big fat book, and everything's packed because I'm loading a moving truck right after I'm done with this. Local Move 1 Mile, highly recommend it. But they can either do it in a paper pencil or they can do it on an online format. And what they do is they get these descriptions of here's what it means to have externalizing behavior. There's a definition, example, and non-example, and then the same for internalizing. So you start by putting 10 kids over here, 10 kids over here, and then the top 3 pass through the first gate. So in this bar right here where it says W07, that's winter 2007, and this is externalizing. So all these teachers showed up to a regularly scheduled faculty meeting, and in that school, there were 60 kids that passed through the first gate, meaning that they were most like the description for acting out. Does that make sense? So like the top 3 kids passed through. Of those 60 kids, teachers fill out a couple of extra pieces of information. One is called the Critical Events Index, the CEI, and that's like behavioral earthquakes. And that's things like steals, sets fire, vomits after eating. So 1 is cause for concern. The other rating scale that they fill out on just those kids, the 3 most shy kids and the 3 most boisterous kids, is this something called the Combined Frequency Index. And it's some of it is maladaptive behaviors like high frequency but low intensity, like behavior that will drive you crazy, like out of your seat, not following instructions. And there's also a measure of adaptive behavior, like how well they do some things. So those 3 scores, the Critical Events Index, the Combined Frequency Index for problem behaviors and adaptive behaviors, all get looked at in a decision tree. In this building, of the 60 kids that passed through that first gate, only 13 kids had higher than average acting out behaviors. That represented 6.8% of the entire school. So now in this one 30-minute meeting, they don't have to guess who has higher than average challenging behaviors. They don't have to wait for kids to earn office discipline referrals. They now know which kids have heightened risk. And in that same school, this is the next year, 2008, 2009, and you'll notice these are all winter screenings because we know risk goes up typically from fall to winter and then drops again in spring. But now look at that graph. 1 year later, after putting their CI3T plan in place, of those now 70 kids that passed through, and that's because the school grew, they added another teacher. And normally when elementary schools get bigger, risk increases, but that's not what's happening in this school. The next year, of the 70 kids that passed through the top gate, only 7 kids, which is 1.5% of these kids, had higher than average risk. So now those 7 kids would be the kids I would think about, what do you need? And I'd go back to the tier 2 grids to start connecting them to extra supports. So if you look over time, those bars are getting bigger, meaning school enrollment is going up, but the percentage of kids with challenging behaviors is holding steady at about 2%. Does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up if that is clear. Okay. At the same time, that happens for internalizing issues. This is the same school for internalizing. And I watched this. Back here, their biggest problem was externalizing, where it was almost 7%. They also had kids with internalizing issues. And over time, you see that same thing, as even though enrollment is going up, the percentage of kids with higher than average internalizing issues is going down. So it creates this transparency, and it gives you a snapshot as to what the overall level of risk is in your building. And then I can unpackage it by grade level. So this is 1 year, and this was winter 2009. Take a look at these data. This is kindergarten. There were 4 students with critical needs. 1 had internalizing and 3 had externalizing. Kindergarten only had 1 with higher than average externalizing, no issues with internalizing. And then second grade, also pretty low. So this school is in really good shape. Now, if I was the principal leader and I was on the CI3T leadership team, I would open up my grids to say, what can I do to support those 3 kids? Because that is completely manageable resource-wise. And there's a wonderful intervention. If you're not familiar with it, please check it out. It's called First Step to Success. And it's also by Hill Walker, and it's to support kids upon initial school entry who have really significant behavior challenges like acting out issues. And with those 3 kids, that's exactly what I would do. I would teach them how to play the school game using that interventions, and that's manageable. Now, if the percentages were much higher, I might need to shift to tier 1 as a starting point, but this is really manageable. Any questions on that specific screener? And again, I'm going to put this in the chat so that you can look it up later. It is called the SSBD, and it's by Hill Walker. Great screening tool and very inexpensive, both the online platform and this one. Now I'm going to spend a little bit more time and I'm going to talk about the SRSS-IE. And I noticed that we've got people in there from Northeastern York School District and a couple other places that are using it, like Lisa. Thanks for letting me know you use it too. This is also another screening tool. It was developed by Tom Drummond, also out of University of Oregon. And then our team adapted it with his permission to add additional items to also pick up kids with internalizing. Because when it was first developed, it was just predominantly looked for kids with acting out behavior. So these first 7 items were initially tested only for elementary, and then it was later expanded for use in middle and high schools. And now through the partnerships that we've had, we've learned that there's 5 other items that we can add to it, and they're rated on that 3-point Likert type scale. Something that did trick, like when I first looked at this, I was skeptical. I'm a board certified behavior analyst, and I'm thinking, how can this work? There's no operational definitions. What's the predictive validity? And that led me to work with our research team. We've done probably 17 studies to date exploring how it works, and it's a really solid tool. It is predicting, like those scores, as I showed you at the first hour, they actually predict how kids do in terms of office discipline referrals earned, in terms of suspensions. It predicts academic outcomes at the middle and high school level. It predicts grade point average and course failure. At the elementary level, it even predicts oral reading fluency rates at the end of the year. So it's a solid tool to date, although additional inquiry is needed. As you saw from the those graphs that I showed you earlier, every single student gets a total score, and then it puts them into one of 3 categories: low, moderate, or high risk for externalizing and internalizing. No decision making has been done yet on the total score, so don't add those up. And sometimes people have said, I'm worried about one rater. Could one teacher possibly be that accurate? And we've done studies that have, like at the middle and high school, where they had 2 different raters, like 2nd and 7th period or 1st and 5th. And we've learned that statistically, there's no additive benefit of the 2nd rater. And so right now, that's what we know. But that's why I encourage you to engage in partnerships to make those lessons, like discover together, how that tool is working. This is what I showed you earlier about how being able to put kids into those groups, just like in the last one. And we want to be able to look to see what percentage of kids, and specifically which kids, need additional support. So like the first year they started screening, this would not have been physically possible, nor would it have been a good idea to start doing tier 2 with 86 kids and tier 3 with 25. Because the percentage of kids at the low risk level was below 80%, I would start by first really hitting tier 1 as a big priority. I'm not saying ignore the other kids, but I am saying recognize that the data will drive your decision making to know where you need to go to intervene. And that was particularly true at the School for Internalizing. Look at those internalizing rates. And this is why it is so wonderful that another positive outcome of the situation that we're in is people have placed a priority on addressing social and emotional well-being at tier 1 as part of an integrated system. And I'm not saying abandon PBIS. I am saying expand it to also address explicit instruction using a validated program. And then again, tackle it in that integration so that we can unpackage it. If you were to look at these data, and I'm going to give you a second to do this, and let's say you were on a CI3T leadership team, what grade level do you think has the greatest need at tier 1? And if you would go ahead and think about it for a moment and then put your thought in the chat, like what grade level is most struggling with tier 1 right now? And to answer that question, what I look at is I see that 80%, almost 81% of the kids are in low risk in grade 3, almost 55 in grade 4, and then 70 in grade 5. and it's starting to come in now. So absolutely, grade 4, I know I've got a challenge. So I would go in and not be in any way critical of those teachers, but I would say, let's take a look at what's happening in terms of fidelity of tier 1, because we need to shore up. And that's how, as like an instructional leader, I would know how to direct my supports. And I do want to be let you know that we've done a number of psychometric studies to show how these tools work. And as I mentioned, the fall scores, like when teachers are worried about when you're introducing screening, and I know a number of you are doing this for the first time, and I applaud you for looking at it. Don't just put a screener in front of the teachers and say, fill this out, we know it'll be accurate. Educate them. So tell them things like, we've done the homework. We know that the information that is provided by teachers is really accurate in predicting who's going to struggle. And I think about it for both externalizing and internalizing. It used to be, teachers used to say things all the time like, I've got a gut feeling about this kid. I just know that this kid's not on the right track, or I'm worried about this child. And it used to be you had to wait for sufficient time between, a discrepancy between, ability and performance. And then that would happen. We'd make a referral. Eventually the kid would go into special ed, but it's years down the road. And the median age for kids going into special ed at that time was like 5th grade is when they started showing up as getting support in special education for behavior challenges. It's too little and it's too late. And if you could have figured that out in kindergarten, who's likely to struggle, then by all means, let's jump on that in a really constructive way and partner with families to say, here are these small little adjustments we can make. And we've learned that even in middle and high schools, the same is true. So early detection does not mean only young kids. We want to do the same screenings all the way through high school. And one person did ask me, like, shouldn't we just give up by the time we get to high school? And like the answer is no. Like people are gonna live until late in life. We want people to, we want to find kids at every sign of concern, and the transition to high school is complicated. One thing we did learn about the functionality of this tool is that this item peer ejection actually becomes more typical of internalizing behaviors as kids get older. So one thing to keep in mind is look at the scoring for this, because item 4 actually gets added into both the externalizing and the internalizing scale, which is why you can't just add those numbers together. And all this is explained in videos and things on the website, but the short version is that's how you use the tool. So the total scores put kids into risk categories, but the total scores are different for elementary and middle and high for internalizing issues. And as I mentioned earlier, people are doing a great job of unpackaging this themselves. These data were from a high school that was screening for the very first time starting in 2016. And I applaud this. These principal leaders were phenomenal. And actually in this book, when we did a second version, I just call it the door book because I never remember the titles. When we went around and we sent emails out to some of our district partners saying, is there anything you want to share about what you've learned or something important? I thought maybe 4 or 5 people would respond. There's like 35 different points of feedback from educators. And I think it's the most valuable thing in there. And the principals from this school, the main principal and the vice principal, showed us all the ways they were using it. And they would send out things like the day before each lesson was taught school-wide for social and emotional learning, reminding people of the why. We're doing this because we're committed to meeting kids where they are. And at one point, there was some unrest in the school as far as some equity issues for different groups of kids. And one of the demands from the student body was more lessons on those soft skills because they felt like there was not enough being addressed. So even the kids were seeing the value in it, both for externalizing and for internalizing. On the screening tab, I want to make you aware that there's a little overview of the screening tools that are currently available. And we have another page that's called CI3T in Action. And there's some videos where you can listen to elementary, middle, and high school educators who have engaged in systematic screenings. And if you get a chance, check out the high school one in particular, because a lot of people will push back on the idea of, do teachers really know kids well enough at the high school when they're only seeing them for 45 minutes a day? And the answer is unequivocally yes. Because remember, you're not just sampling behavior in just that moment you see with kids. There's other information that's gleaned, and teachers, again, are incredibly accurate. Now, as enthusiastic as I am about screening, it would be super unwise to just start screening without clarity of what's happening at tier 1, because the first thing we need to do is see how kids are responding to tier 1 efforts. So you got to get clarity on, here is what we are offering, and collect fidelity on that tier 1 experience. And then we have to have a plan for what we're going to do with the screening data. But just like I was showing you, the first thing is to see how are kids responding. So if your first screening time point happens 4 to 6 weeks after the school year begins, you would schedule some professional learning for teachers, and it's short along the way to say, here's what screening data are, here's how reliable they are, here's the decisions between like what we've selected and how we're using it. They screen, and then they screen again in winter. And it's a very short period of time. It's 2 months later, they screen again. So this is like 15 minutes, and this is 15 minutes, or this is 30, and this is 30, depending on the tool you pick. But before the kids leave for winter break, you're going to have 2 time points. So you will be able to see, are kids responding to tier 1 efforts? And if they're not, then we know we need to make a plan for when they return in January. So it's very manageable. And I know it's terrifying, like when you first start screening. And I remember one school, they contacted me and they're like, oh my gosh, Kathleen, like we screened and there's 42% of the kids that have tier 3 needs. How am I, or have tier 2 needs? How am I getting them all into groups? And I'm like, okay, take a breath. Everybody drama down. Those kids were there yesterday and they're still here today. And because it's 42% that you're saying need tier 2, that's not a tier 2 issue. That's a tier 1 issue. So let's start there. Yep, high five. Let's give it up, guys. Pandemic praise. Ready? Okay, good. So we're going to use the data to shape instruction calmly, and we're not going to have whiplash and now we're going to stop and do this and stop and do this. You've got a plan for tier 1 and then the grids to show tier 2 and tier 3. So we want to build this ideally at a district level, so it's supported by the district. We want to prepare for it. And then we have tons of logistics for you. And as do like commercially available tools, like if you were to get like the SIS performance screening guide, they have resources to explain it. Like the stuff I'm sharing with you right now, it's all manualized and you can purchase that. And there's little coaching protocols and things. And whatever you do, just make sure that you invest in the screening tool, but don't pick one just because it's cheap, or don't pick one just because it's short. Pick one that is appropriate for the population of kids that you're serving. So look to see who it was normed on. And then, apologies, think about the dedicated time it's going to take. And screening is super fast. I've also seen this go very, very poorly. It would be a tragedy, and I've watched it happen this way where there is no education. It's literally just like they said, log in, answer these questions. I know that you're accurate. And it terrified teachers, like, what is this? How it's going to be used? So like everything else, we want people to know what it is, the why of it, and how it's going to be used. So make sure that you have a clear professional learning plan for launching it and then sustaining it, including how to get information back. We do not want to screen and then never share the data. That would be a waste of people's time. In education, we're all sick to death of completing information that never gets used. Now, some of the things that I've also seen done incredibly well, there's coaching protocols on our website, like I mentioned, at the very bottom of the screening page, and there actually will be updated the first week in August, so like next week. But one of the principals even did things like, or the district, they did it like, here's your preview date. So the instruction to principal was log in to make sure everything's pre-populated correctly, that you see who's like, that everything's ready to be completed. One of the CI3T leadership team members that we worked with, it was a secondary age school. It was high school specifically. And the first time that they did screening, it was a fall. They went in and checked it. They launched it. They brought teachers, and they did it in department meetings at the high school level. So they just sat down. They had people there to show them, like, right across, not down, all those instructions. And then there's a hard close. So it's like usually open for like a 2-week period. And what the person did that was in charge of screening, literally the 48 hours before it closed, opened it up and checked to make sure that every kid was screened. And if one wasn't, what he did is like, let's say it was Danielle. If Danielle hadn't yet screened, he literally picked up the call and said, hey, this is Bill. Danielle, I know you haven't screened yet. How can I help you get this done? Would you like me to come cover your class right now, or would you like to do it right after school today? And he was the athletic director, and he was kind of scary, I'm not gonna lie. And I just think the way he handled it was very gentle, but really clear that this is a priority. This is not a suggestion, because if you are using these screening data to connect kids to support, and if you do not screen a child, you are limiting their opportunity to get support, because it's the screening data that connect them. So I thought it was done so well, which is great follow through. And then it needs to get aggregated and shared. So this is an example of a coaching protocol. It will look 1,000 times better in just a little bit, but it literally goes through like these preview dates. Like here's when the windows should open and when they should close and when they're going to be hard closed by the district. And then so all those dates would be set. And we have these as editable forms there now, and you can download them. And then people will often say, okay, where do I find that free access one? It's on that website. You just download it. It's an Excel spreadsheet. You should build it. You should not email it to people, but build it in whatever system is secure for you. And remember, these data are important. So we want to make sure that, like, I would never email this. I would put it on a trusted drive. I'd work within a district system and do it in a way where it can be aggregated super quickly. And on our website, we have little forms. You can make those pretty graphs and things like that. But the total scores and the graphs and stuff that I'm sharing with you, those should be shared. And then those with appropriate educational rights should be able to draw down multiple sources of information to connect kids to supports. So what I'd like you to think about right now in the next couple minutes is, what are your immediate questions or concerns about systematic screening? And if you want to go ahead and just dump in the chat questions that you might have. One that I am certain you're going to have is, what is the role of parent permission in this? And that's why at a district level, you might decide, and this is what most people do, is they send home an informational letter at the beginning of the year. And like in our partnership, they will say things like, we are a CI3T district, and just like we benchmark 3 times a year for reading and math, we are now also benchmarking 3 times a year to be able to best meet your child's behavioral and social needs in school. We're going to use this information to shape what we do for all kids and then provide specific supports for kids that have additional needs. One person showed me a copy of their district letter that went home, and they actually send a letter out 3 times a year. And it says your child has tier 1 needs for this, or tier 2 needs for this, or tier 3 needs for this. And they share their academic and their behavior screening data, super transparent. And people will say to me, do you have a sample district letter? And the answer is no. And I intentionally do not put templates of that on our website, because I don't want anybody to not think carefully about their own context. I don't want somebody to draw down, put their district name in and send it out. You need to think carefully about, what are we committing to? Many districts also have an opt-out option, that if the parent doesn't want their child screened, they can decide that, but they do an excellent job of making sure that the parent sees what that means. That means that your child won't be looked at 3 times a year to see if they need more in that area. So it can remove them from a quick detection of needing that extra support. So you want them to be clear on how it's used and how it is not used. Other thoughts or questions? And if you have those, you can just dump them in the chat. One other thing that often comes up is the timing of screening. And sometimes people will say, so if I think there's a problem, that's when I screen, and that's not how screening works. Screening is every single kid. If you have 13,000 kids in your district, all 13,000 kids get screened 3 times a year. And remember, it's just a screener. Some people will say, should I do 2 screeners? We've had people do 2 screeners just to give teachers exposure to both, to see what they look like and how they're used to inform decision making. But you don't need multiple screeners. Same for academics. Like, you wouldn't do Dibbles and Ames Web and ThinkLink and running records, right? You would do 1, and you do it well and with fidelity. And great question about who would you recommend to analyze the data and do some informed decision making. In the partners that we work with at the district level, usually there's a district level team that quickly aggregates the data. One of the guys we work with, they have it set up so that it's literally like they close it, and then 24 hours later, every principal can pop in and they get the triangle for like their schools for internalizing and externalizing. Teachers have access to it, that same 40-hour thing. And some schools have it like you log into your information system and they can pull up their class and they can click on different things like show me fall oral reading, show me fall internalizing, externalizing, show me office discipline referrals, show me attendance. And then it's just like that grid that I showed you. We recommend that there be like, look for your naturally occurring teams. Like it might be professional learning communities, like at a grade level or a department level, that come together to look at data. It is not a pre-referral intervention process, because the whole point is for teachers to use this to quickly get kids to those extra supports. And a great questions about like what happens in this COVID era. And I'm actually going to talk about that, but we recommend you do continue to screen, but screen cautiously, because remember, none of the predictive validity studies or convergent validity studies have been done in remote environments. And that's actually what we will be doing this year as part of Project Screen. And if you want to reach out to me, Lisa, after this, I'd be happy to show you a little bit about the guidance that we're giving to people. We got a paper under review, and we'll have another voiceover PowerPoint kind of giving people very specific guidelines if you're using the SRSS in the COVID era. But for right now, what you're going to do with these data is be prepared to do the same 3 things that we've talked about. Look at your school overall. This we've talked about really needs tier 1 support. This, we know that tier 1's in pretty solid position, and we would move forward with tier 2 and tier 3. And again, I'm not saying don't do tier 2 and tier 3 if you have a tier 1 problem, but you have to think efficiently about how you're going to build a base that's going to sustain those new behaviors. I would absolutely take a look, as we've talked about, look at the multiple sources of data that teachers need to be able to access so that they can get a complete picture, and so they can look across. Like if I look at this child, Jasper, this kid has tier 3 needs for math, tier 2 needs for reading. This kid has really high externalizing and internalizing behaviors and has earned a lot of office discipline referrals. And like many kids with acting out issues, he's an excellent attender. Aren't those kids never sick? Amen for strong immune systems. So I'm going to look at this information and think about what's the best combined intervention that I can do for this child. That's going to be a different approach than this kid, like Ashley, who is not a great attender, who also struggles with internalizing and math issues. So I need to think about, even if I'm going to go do a math intervention for her, if she's racked with anxiety, I have to think about what behavioral support can I empower her with. So for Ashley, it might be, honey, we're going to do this math intervention together. And I know sometimes it's scary to be called on when we're in a small group together. So I'm going to give you 6 paper clips. And when we go into our math group today, I promise I'm not ever going to call on you, but I would love for you to share 3 or 6 times. And every time you do, just move a paper clip into your pocket. When this pocket's empty, you're all done. And if you want to share more, that's great. But that behavioral support removes the anxiety of being called upon, because Ashley might spend that whole math group thinking, oh my gosh, if she calls me, I'm going to get the wrong answer. If I get the wrong answer, I'm going to be embarrassed. If I'm embarrassed, they're going to tease me. And if they tease me, I'm not going to come to school. And if I don't come to school, I'm not going to graduate. And if I don't graduate, then I'm going to become homeless. And if I'm homeless, I'm going to be, and all of a sudden this kid's showering in the fountain on the street looking for a place to eat instead of just being in that math group right there. So let's remove that anxiety for Ashley so that school can be a more comfortable place for her to come and engage positively, productively, and securely. That's where those strategies come in, is knowing how to pull out things. So she might need a higher rate of behavior specific praise. So all these resources that we've talked about multiple times today are going to be used to shape what we do with instruction, but screening's at the crux. Then when we think about the tier 2s, now we're back to the rubber band, the box, the ab mat, all that kind of stuff. And I want you to think carefully about looking at multiple sources of data together. So like for these kids, let's say, and these kids' names were changed. Those kids have both higher levels of challenging behavior, and these data were collected before the internalizing scale was there. So this is just acting out. And the 3 in the area of reading means they are at the highest level of risk for reading. So this combined tier 2 intervention might be a reading intervention plus a behavioral support. It can be as simple as this. So imagine we're at a reading table, or imagine we're at a virtual reading environment where I'm logged in and I'm one of the kids, and maybe Stephanie is the teacher. And so maybe it's me and Phyllis and Lisa, and we're the 3 kids in this group. And maybe I'm the only one that has this interfering, challenging behavior. So Stephanie might think, okay, I got to think about what I can do to keep Kathleen engaged during this extra reading instruction. Because I might want to talk about, squirrel that I saw through the window and all this kind of stuff. So she could build for me a self-monitoring intervention that looks like this. I show up to the table or virtually, and this says, did I come to the reading table when my teacher called my name? Did I read my book? Did I build words or practice words with practice the sounds with tiles? Did I tap the letter sounds? Did I practice trick words? Did I follow my teacher's instructions? There's a debate on whether or not you should have the frowny face, but happy face or no. And then down at the bottom, it says, if I got 5 out of 6 of those done, I would get an acknowledgement, a ticket. And if I matched my teacher rating, I would also get a ticket. Because as a teacher, I'm gonna have that same list over here, because that's, again, that's my fidelity sheet to make sure I did those things for Kathleen during the reading intervention so that I can show that behavioral support was in place. Oh, and by the way, why would I want to, even if the kid had a total cruddy day and had all frowny faces, why would you still give them an acknowledgement if their ratings match their teacher's rating? What are you reinforcing? Beautiful. That's right, Christina. We are reinforcing honesty because that's one of the things we've been teaching at Tier 1, accountability on building that relationship. And it's like, yep, even when you have a horrible day, I appreciate your integrity of being honest. That's great. And that's exactly how we tie it into that soft skill. Because we're all going to have days when we're human, you know, the day when you get up to go to work after the pandemic and all of a sudden, you know, what you plan to wear, you can't wear, you either have to call in fat or get a new outfit and, you know, whatever, it's just hard. And so some days we're not on our best behaviors, right? It has to be okay. We have to have a path for moving forward. So this self-monitoring intervention, and that's why we ask you, do not put a separate list of here's my academic Tier 2, here's my behavioral Tier 2, here's my social and emotional. That illustration I just went through is an example of how to weave all 3 of those again. I'm tackling reading, which is the keystone priority, but I cannot ignore the internalizing issues. I can't ignore the kid has the attention span of a gnat, and I don't want to forget those soft skills that I want to teach along the way. So we're going to build those together, and that's the point of the grids. And then here, when we look at the decision making, this is the point that you really want to cling to here, is we want to not have these be empathetic connections. We want them to be data informed. Some kids are blessed with parents that know how to work collaboratively with the school system, and some people are not as comfortable. And we have to make sure that we have transparent systems for working to break down the barriers. We have to support the equity and access to make sure that no matter what, every kid gets considered at least 3 times a year for what they need more of. And then it's not only somebody with a strong parent advocate that can get it. So when I look at these data in action, I want to operationalize those scores there. So I'm going to look at this score to say, where are they falling for externalizing? And then I'm going to say, where are they falling academically to see, is this a good support for that particular child? This is an automated little video, and you have this if you want to be able to show it to people. And I'm going to let this run through a second time. But this is actually a way to shortlist to say, show me everybody that's at moderate risk for challenging behaviors and who is also struggling in the area of reading. So watch this. Show me moderate risk for behavior. And then that shortens it down. So now you see that you've got 5 kids that are at moderate risk for externalizing, and now tell me how they're doing in the area of reading. So in my class, I've got 2 kids with moderate behavior challenges and who have mid-level needs for reading. Does that part make sense? So it's literally just sort it to be able to do that. And Mark Buckman made that slide. I think it's the best slide in the entire world. He's one of my doc students, so he graduated shortly. He's awesome. I'd also encourage you, as I mentioned, to pay attention to the absenteeism. We cannot ignore that. And I cannot tell you how many times that's just like over here and off to the side. I remember like at one point when I was in elementary school and my teacher was teaching us how to use a protractor. And it was like seriously like the 3rd or 4th day of instruction. I go up and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I still cannot remember how to use this. And she like takes it out of my hand and she's like, knocks me on the head with it. And she's like, Kathleen, do you have anything going on up there at all? I'm like, nothing. I've got nothing today. If you can just show me one more time. And she laughed, I laughed. And I'm not suggesting a positive behavior support is to use the instructional tools as a weapon. That's not what she was doing. But she was frustrated with me. But in retrospect, when I look back on that now, I needed one more trial than any other kid in that class but I had also just been out for almost a solid month with pneumonia and scarlet fever. So I had missed all the base level instruction for that. So even though she had taught, she's a great teacher, she taught it very clearly, my absenteeism got in the way of that. Does that feel comfortable? So we want to think about those going together and not beat up a teacher or a kid for not being there. So we think about all these other options. What can I do? Use the data to connect kids to supports. And on the website, as I mentioned, we try to connect you to evidence-based supports. Check out daily behavior report cards or daily behavior ratings. Check out the tier 2 and tier 3 options for soft skills, for social skills. I am not saying that you can't do these as smaller groups. You absolutely should, but I'm just saying there's about a billion other things you can do as well. And you don't need a ton, you need really good ones. One of the activities we do is we help everybody brainstorm a big list of here's everything in your building. And then we encourage you to take out the things, get rid of things that don't have enough evidence. There's some things that we do at tier 2 and tier 3 out of history and not because of efficacy. And so we want to create space in people's lives. So if there's things that we know don't work, we should not continue doing it. One of the schools that we work with, they had an F table for lunch. And the intervention was if kids were earning, I know, if they were, and it was well intended, but just, So it was, kids sat there for lunch. If they were failing class, they put for lunch. And so we're trying to gently guide them through that. I'm like, okay, well, how's that going? You know, our kids recurrently at the F table, well, oh yeah, same kids all the time, you know, and I'm like, okay, so let's think about that. There's no evidence to suggest it. And the kids that are getting that F table lunch, now they're still staying there. So they're not exiting, right? And now they form the F table lunch club. So that's not working. So let's take that out of the mix and bring some time and energy in for other things. And we're gonna do the exact same thing at tier 3 with function-based thinking being at the very, very top of the list. And this is a special issue on how to do functional assessment-based interventions using those same resources that are on our website. So if you want to learn more about that, and that's Wendy Oakes and Robin Ennis, who've been great contributors. And those are my children and my husband, because I didn't realize I didn't have stock photos. So I'm like, everybody throw on some clothes, quick, run to the school, click, click, click. There you go. That's my life. That's like Kathleen Lane's research life. Oh my gosh, so many stories. I hope I get to see you all again. My daughter's in the process of, she's becoming a special educator and she's applying to schools right now for graduate school. And to read her college or her applications about like, and then I was 6 days old and my mom took me to school here. So yeah, there's a lot of that going on, but that's all right. So right now I'd like you to think about what you're doing well at tier 2. And will you drop in an intervention, if you would, into the chat or something that you're doing that you think is really good? Like, do you have data teams in place? Like, or do you already have professional learning communities that are looking at dates? Do you have dedicated teams to look at it? And I agree with Phyllis, like we really just want to make sure we're not doing public shaming. We know that punishment doesn't work. It gives you an immediate change in behavior, but it actually breeds aggression, it breeds anxiety, it doesn't teach anything new. And we can all probably name a time in our life where we still remember that horrible feeling from when we were publicly shamed. And so we'll just take introducing aversives off the table. So what are you doing well at tier 2? Go ahead and drop that in the chat. That's great. And I'm looking at these wonderful support. So when we're thinking of like the counseling and stuff, the nice thing is like if you pick like a tier 1 curriculum like positive action, they even have counselor kit lessons on it. So you can find out like here's what's being taught to all kids by, you know, teachers, and maybe it's in collaboration with a counselor, maybe not. And then the counselor like at tier 2 can screen in kids that need more than tier 1 has to offer. Great. It's super exciting to see what you put together. And those interagency collaborations, like those might be tier 3 support. So you create clarity for families to understand that if it gets to this point, here's what we would do. So it's it's just a way basically to create a very transparent method of communicating between faculty and staff and families and administrators to know, here's everything we're doing at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and here's the path on how to get there. I remember being at a school one time, and I was waiting for a CFOT meeting to begin, and I was sitting outside the principal's office and not in trouble. And this parent came in, and she was new to school, and I loved the way this district did it. Their manual, they actually blew up on a giant, like Kinko size, huge poster, and it was in all buildings. When you walked in, it was like, here's tier 1, here's the offerings for tier 2 and tier 3. And I watched this woman, and I was waiting for the principal, and she's outside, and she's looking at all these tier 2s, she's writing stuff down. Then she comes in, and of course I'm on recon trying to understand what she's saying. And she's like, goes to the principal, and she's like, all right, I'm new here, and I want my daughter to have this writing intervention, and my son's gonna need this. And he just walked her right back out and said, let me show you how this works. She said, good. He said, good news is we will be checking every single kid in this school, 779 kids at that school. He's like, here's how we do it. We screen 3 times a year, and this is how we're gonna use the information. And you could physically watch the relief in that parent. It's like, great. You know, it's like, I can take the day off. You know, there was somebody already checking to see what her kids needing when they transitioned in. So good benefits of these. And I so appreciate knowing what your structures are. The last thing I want to close with as we wrap up, 2 quick things. Going back to the questions in the COVID era about how should you screen and do it. One of the things that we'll be updating on our website is some guidance on what you should keep in mind. We will have a very short voice thread that explains, there'll be like 3 or 4 slides that are going to go into these topics in more detail, and we'll have a very short brief to go with it. But you absolutely do want to continue screening, but you need to screen cautiously because the additional inquiry is still underway. If you have the opportunity right now, partner with somebody at your local university to help you analyze your data this coming year in fall, winter, and spring to see how it does play out. So like you can see what might need to be shifted. And remember, screening data is just one piece of information that you're going to use to connect kids to these other supports, like attendance, like these other metrics, like to see how they're doing in reading, like we've been illustrating. And remember, if you're going to introduce new sources for screening, like we talked about in the morning, it is really important. If teachers are mandated reporters, they would have reported if they were concerned about that child being a danger to themselves or to others. And it is 100% likely that if you have kids self-report, or if you have parents fill out screeners, you're going to learn something new that you did not know that you may need to respond to. And you just have to have a plan for making sure that that's in place. One of the things that we'll be putting on our website is we're going to be asking schools to add 2 questions to their SRSS, i.e., what was your instructional method at the time of this screening window? Was it remote? Was it hybrid? Was it in person? And then secondly, was this kid a regular attender? And for the people we partner with, we will be actually analyzing their data on a rapid schedule to be able to show them that during those 3 data points, here's what we learned about, does it work in the same way? Meaning, is it as equally accurate when teachers are working with kids in this environment? And those lessons remain to be learned. But this would be the wrong time to not screen, because now more than ever, we've got to keep an eye on kids as they're coming back. Because remember, and I think we're all, and that's what just impresses me about you guys specifically and educators in general, is that we're all managing the same stress ourselves. Some of us are dealing with aging parents that we may not get to see again. And many of us are, lonely from the social distancing. And we're all doing the very best we can to be parents for the people that we love and support, and trying to work full time. And, educators, like, I think one of the best outcomes of this could be that people will have an all new level of appreciation for educators after having everybody's children home for several months. And I think that's a positive outcome. And I think it is an amazing thing to watch, like even in the partnerships that we have in Washington and Arizona and Kansas and Missouri and Vermont, like these people that I already had such deep respect for, I'm watching them just put together these just refined systems so that they're ready to take what they already had in place and shift it to meet families wherever they are. So keep going with what you're doing. If you're new to screening, seek out that education. And remember, when you're making the transparencies for next year, please think carefully about what it will look like in person and virtually. And when it's going to be remote or continuous, think through what those expectations will be and think about unintended consequences. Meaning, think about like cultural considerations. For some people, it might feel uncomfortable to have video turned on, and we need to understand why. And then we need to make sure that we're not pushing people in a super uncomfortable way, but we're making sure that we are connecting. Make sure also that we do not switch social skills curriculums right now. Read through what you've been doing in in-person environments. So if you were a school or a district already using Second Step, stay with that. Thread the language systems through for kids and show them the stuff that we've already been doing together. We're going to continue to do. And I know that different companies are actually creating new lesson plans to make that happen. So as we wrap up, just a couple quick things to remember. Drop onto this page regularly. We have tons of resources. We'll be updating them, and we're happy to share. Look for the family components to meet families where they are. And please remember, there are, as of right now, 41 million people impacted by unemployment. This is a very stressful time for families. The resources that we share, we want to make sure we're sharing them in a way that does not alienate the people we're trying to support. So think about what they need. You might do some overview and then ask them for what they need, or you might have a little virtual open house to help them do that. Look to pbis.org. That is the National Center site for positive behavior intervention and support. And I so appreciate your kindness. Thank you for the kind words in this chat. You have my email. Thank you so much. And I hope that you'll keep in touch. And I hope someday I'll be able to see you in person. I am a hugger. So and I know that it's going to be a long time before the world's at that place again right now, but just know I got you. And if I can do anything to support you, please let me know. And Christina, thank you so much for this opportunity to work with you. Wonderful people. So love you guys. Be safe. Wash your hands. Wear your mask. Over your mouth. No mouth. Do all those good things. And right now, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lane. We appreciate you.
Oh, thank you.
Someone did ask in the chat for the best info to contact you at. Do you want to put your email in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to put my email and my cell phone number. If there's questions you didn't feel comfortable asking in front of the group, email's my best way to reach me. And then I'm going to put in the chat my cell phone number. And that's my personal cell. So just text me or call me. I'll be very excited. It never rings. So.
Thank you so much.
All right. Be safe. I'll talk to you all soon. Be careful.
Bye-bye.